A city that is mired in darkness. Sometimes it's important to go back to where you started, to protect those you care about and to restore what is lost. When I came home, the city wasn't the same. Everything had changed in the years I had been gone. It didn't seem like much had happened, the same dusty roads, the same old houses with peeling paint, but a sense of something wrong was in the air. This place is worse than I expected, I thought as I got out of the car at my parents' house. I had left the service 3 months ago when I realized I could no longer tolerate this constant cycle of abuse and loss. Serving in the military taught me many things, but the biggest lesson was the fear of losing myself forever. I moved far away from it all, hoping to find peace, but now, standing on the doorstep of my hometown, I felt that this place was no longer mine. My mom met me on the porch with a smile that immediately reminded me of my childhood. But even her eyes, always so kind and bright, now seemed a little faded. My father, as usual, stood silently beside me with his hands in his pockets. He had never been much for talking, preferring to express his feelings with actions. He put his arms around me, and I could feel the sadness in his silence, as if he realized that our time together might be short. We went inside, and Mom started setting the table. I noticed that the house looked the same as before, only a little older. It was as if time had left its mark on every surface, every piece of furniture. "What's new in town?" I asked, taking a sip of iced tea. Mom sighed. "A lot has changed, son. People are leaving, there are no jobs. And those who stayed often get into trouble. The town is deserted, stores are closing one after another." My father nodded, confirming her words. "Yeah, things have gone downhill. Even your old friend Joe lost his job a couple months ago. Now he's trying to make ends meet by doing some small business. I've known Joe since high school. We were best friends, but then we went our separate ways. When I left the service, he stayed here trying to get a job. I heard he was doing pretty well, but I guess things have changed. The next day I decided to take a walk around town to see how much things had changed. It turned out to be a lot different than I'd realized. The stores were empty, the windows were boarded up, and there was hardly anyone to be seen in the streets. Only the occasional passerby hurried past, as if afraid to stay in one place too long. And that's when I met Ashley. She was standing outside one of the old stores, looking at a sign that hadn't been updated in a while. Her wheat-colored hair fluttered in the wind, and her eyes looked straight ahead, like she was seeing something that the rest of us couldn't see. "Hi, Ashley," I said, stepping closer. She flinched and turned to me. "Jason. You're back." Ashley was my first love. We'd met in high school, but then life had taken us to different parts of the world. She'd changed, grown up, but her eyes still had the same warmth they had before. "It's been a long time," I continued, trying to hide my excitement. "How are you?" She shrugged. "I live like everyone else. Working at the local library, trying to keep afloat. The town's changed, you know. Not what it used to be." We walked the streets, reminiscing about the past. Time passed quickly, and soon we found ourselves at an old park where we used to spend a lot of time together. It looked abandoned now, the benches broken, the grass trampled. "Remember when we used to come here?" Ashley asked, taking a seat on one of the few benches still standing. "Of course I remember," I said, taking a seat next to her. It was the best time. We sat in silence, savoring the moment. But suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps. Someone was coming toward us through the park, and the footsteps were heavy, sure. It was Joe. His face seemed tired, his eyes suspicious. He stopped in front of us with his arms crossed over his chest. "So, buddy, you're back, huh?" he said, smiling crookedly. "Back, yeah," I said, standing up. "It's good to see you, Joe." But the joy was fake. Something was different about him, and that something made me feel uncomfortable. "Glad? Ha! Well, let's see how long your joy lasts." Joe took a step forward, and I could feel the tension building between us. "Why don't you tell me why you're here? Or did you just come back to see what your hometown had become?" "I just wanted to see my parents," I answered, trying to stay calm. and to see how my friends were doing. Joe laughed. Things? Oh, everybody's doing different things. Some got fired, some went to jail, some disappeared without a trace. That's the way it is, buddy. He came closer, and I could see that his eyes were as cold as ice. Look, Joe, let's not make a scene, I tried to reassure him. We're friends, remember? But Joe just snorted. Friends? Are you serious? I heard you were in the army, you became a tough guy. And I stayed here, trying to survive. So don't tell me about friendship. Suddenly, he turned to Ashley. And you, beautiful, you better stay away from this guy. He'll bring you nothing but trouble. Turning around, Joe walked away, leaving us alone. I looked at Ashley, feeling the anxiety rising inside. I think he's really changed, she said quietly. It wasn't like this before. Yeah, I guess so, I agreed. We'll have to find out what's wrong. That evening I went to the local bar, where all the local kids used to gather. The bartender, an older man with gray hair, recognized me immediately. Jason, it's great to see you again, he exclaimed, extending his hand. How are you? Fine, I said, sitting down on a stool. What's new here? The bartender shook his head. Nothing good, kid. A lot of guys are in trouble. Some got mixed up with bad company, some just went on a bender. And some, like Joe, are trying to survive any way they can. You mean Joe got into some kind of trouble? I clarified. The bartender nodded. Yes, they say he's gotten involved with the local gangsters. Helping them with delivering goods, if you know what I mean. I frowned. Joe had always been a good guy, but apparently times had changed and he had to go to extreme measures to survive. The next day I went into town, wanting to look around, visit old acquaintances and ask them about what was going on in town. But suddenly I was blocked by Joe coming around the corner, accompanied by two muscular guys. Well, buddy, Joe began, coming closer. Decided to come back and ruin my case? I'm not going to mess up anybody's business, I replied calmly. I just want to understand what's going on. Joe laughed. You see, the thing is, you're an extra here. This town isn't yours anymore, and the sooner you realize that, the better for everyone. One of the guys behind Joe took a step forward, clenching his fists. I had to tense up, preparing myself for a possible fight. Hey, Joe, calm down. I don't need any trouble, I just came home. But Joe only snorted. Home? There's no more room for the likes of you here. You better get out of here while you're still in one piece. I glanced at Joe. If you want to talk, let's talk. But no threats and no fighting. Joe smirked. Okay, let's talk. But first, listen to me carefully. This town belongs to us now, and if you try to get in our way, you'll regret it. His words sounded like a threat, and I realized that the situation was becoming dangerous. But instead of retreating, I decided to act. All right, Joe, I said, approaching slowly. Then tell me exactly what you want to do. Joe nodded to his boys and they stepped aside, giving us a chance to talk in private. You see, buddy, Joe began, lowering his voice. There's a deal here that needs to go smoothly. The guys I work with don't like to have their plans ruined. They want it to go off without a peep. You know what I'm talking about? I looked at Joe carefully, realizing he was talking about something illegal. His demeanor had changed so much that it was hard to believe this was the same guy we used to run around these streets with. Joe, I'm not going to interfere with your business, I said, trying to stay calm. But if you're planning something illegal, I won't be able to stand by. Joe grinned. Illegal? Buddy, the law stopped working in this town a long time ago. It's got its own rules that apply here. And if you want to stay alive, you better follow them. He took a step back, his eyes narrowed. You think you can come here and change everything? Forget it. You'd better leave before it's too late. With those words, he turned and walked away. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. coming home wasn't what I'd imagined. Instead of warmth and comfort, I was faced with threat and danger. I can't just leave, my place is here with my parents. And if Joe and his men are doing something bad, it's my responsibility to try and stop them. The next few days passed in suspense. I didn't want to meet Joe and his men, but every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. The city that had once been my home now seemed like a foreign and dangerous place. One evening, as I was returning home after a walk, a stranger approached me. He was dressed in dark jeans and a jacket, his face hidden under a hoodie. "Mr. Jason?" he asked, coming closer. I nodded warily. "Yes, that's me. What do you want?" The stranger looked around, checking to see if anyone was following him, then whispered, "You should know that there's a big deal going down tomorrow night. Joe and his men are going to smuggle the goods across the border. If you want to stop that from happening, you need to be there." The man named a place that was on the outskirts of town, near an abandoned warehouse. "Be careful, Mr. Jason," he added, before disappearing into the darkness. I returned home, thinking about what I'd heard. I told my parents what I had learned. My mom started to worry, begging me to stay out of dangerous matters, but my dad was supportive, as always. "Son, if you feel it's the right thing to do, then go, and do what you have to do," he said, squeezing my hand tightly. "We will always be proud of you." Night came quickly. I took my flashlight and a knife hidden in my jacket pocket and headed towards the designated spot. As I approached the abandoned warehouse, there was darkness inside, only the faint light of the moon illuminating the way. I stood in the shadows of the warehouse, watching Joe's group. My heart was pounding frantically in my chest, adrenaline pulsing through my veins. There was silence all around, broken only by occasional rustles and whispers. One of them was holding a large bag, obviously with the very same goods. "Joe, stop," I said loudly, coming out of hiding. All eyes turned to me instantly. Joe turned around sharply, his eyes flashing with anger. "You're here again? I warned you," he growled, stepping forward. The rest of the group turned their attention to me as well. One of them pulled out a firearm and pointed it in my direction. "Stand down," I shouted, trying to remain calm. "No one should get hurt." Joe laughed. "Are you serious? You think you can stop us? Leave while you're still in one piece." But I wasn't about to give up. Taking a step forward, I prepared myself for any situation. At that moment, there was a loud pop, and the warehouse door flew aside. Police officers rushed into the room. They surrounded the group, ordering everyone to put their hands in the air. It turns out that the unknown informant who alerted me to the deal was an undercover cop. He passed the information to the police and they organized an operation to capture the criminals. They all got arrested. A few weeks passed. The town was slowly coming back to life, the stores were reopening, the streets were filling up with people, and the sense of danger was slowly fading. Ashley and I continued to see each other, and our relationship grew stronger and stronger. Sometime later, as I was walking home in the evening after work, a stranger approached me. "Mr. Jason?" he asked, approaching me. I nodded warily. "Yes, that's me. What do you want?" The stranger stepped closer and spoke. "You should know that Joe has escaped from prison. He's looking for you." Joe was free and apparently out for revenge. The stranger walked away, leaving me alone with troubling thoughts. Meanwhile, Ashley was waiting for me at home. We had planned to spend the evening together, but the news of Joe's escape had completely changed my plans. I called her and asked her to leave town immediately. She tried to object, but I was adamant. An hour later, she got in her car and drove away, promising to come back when things calmed down. Left alone, I began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. At night, I sat in the living room with a loaded firearm in my hand. Time stretched slowly, each minute seemed like an eternity. Suddenly there was a soft creak of the door. I froze, listening. Then there were footsteps. Joe entered the room, his face contorted with hatred. "So, buddy," he began, stepping closer. Did you think you could just walk away from me like that? I stood up, holding my firearm at the ready. Joe, you have to stop. It's over. He laughed. Over? No, buddy, it's just beginning. You ruined my business, you ruined my plans. Now you're going to pay for it. Joe took a step forward, and at that moment a volley sounded. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, and he fell to the floor, crying out in pain and grabbing his shoulder. I ran up to him, intending to finish what I had started, but at that moment I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw two men with firearms. They raised them, aiming at me. I tried to grab mine, but it was too late. Two volleys rang out and the world was plunged into darkness. When I woke up, I found myself tied to a chair in some basement. Joe was standing in front of me, his arm bandaged, but his eyes burning with hatred. Did you think you could beat me, buddy? He growled. But you were wrong. Now you will die. He raised his firearm and aimed at my head. At that moment, the basement door flew outward. Police officers rushed into the room. They surrounded Joe and his men, ordering everyone to put their hands in the air. Turns out Ashley hadn't traveled far. She came back into town and alerted the police to my whereabouts. The cops got there in time to rescue me. Joe and his men were arrested. I watched them being led away in handcuffs, feeling relieved. The city would finally be free of this threat. After everything that had happened, I decided to stay in my hometown. My parents needed support, and I needed a fresh start. Together with Ashley, we began to rebuild the town, helping the locals. Time passed, and gradually the town came back to life. Stores reopened, the streets filled with people, and the feeling of danger gradually went away. Ashley and I continued to see each other, and our relationship grew stronger and stronger. Sometimes it's important to go back to where you started, to protect those you care about and to rebuild what was lost.